In the glittering halls of Eldoria's royal palace, where centuries of tradition mask modern scandals, one woman's determination to protect her family's legacy will shatter the carefully constructed lies that hold the crown together. When Princess Isabella discovers a secret that could destroy everything she holds dear, she must choose between royal duty and devastating truth. What she uncovers will not only change the line of succession forever, but will force the future king to confront a reality that brings him to his knees in the throne room, where his ancestors once ruled with absolute power. The morning mist clung to the ancient towers of Eldoria Castle like secrets refusing to be revealed. Princess Isabella Montclair stood at the tall windows of the East Wing, watching the sunrise paint the kingdom in shades of gold and crimson. At 58, she remained one of the most respected members of the royal family, known for her unwavering dedication to duty and her fierce protection of the crown's reputation. Isabella had always been the one to clean up messes. When her younger brother, King Edmund, had made questionable decisions in his youth, she had smoothed things over with Parliament. When scandals threatened the monarchy, she found ways to redirect public attention. But this morning, as she held a manila envelope in her trembling hands, she knew she faced something that couldn't be swept under the royal carpet. The envelope had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a nervous young woman who claimed to be a former palace employee. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, had worked in the private quarters of Queen Consort Vivian for nearly 2 years before mysteriously leaving her position 6 months earlier. Sarah's hands had shaken as badly as Isabella's were shaking now when she handed over the envelope. "Your Highness," Sarah had whispered, glancing around nervously even though they were alone in Isabella's private study. "I couldn't live with this secret anymore. The people deserve to know the truth about their future queen." Isabella had wanted to dismiss the woman immediately. Palace employees left all the time, and disgruntled former staff often tried to sell false stories to tabloids. But something in Sarah's eyes, a mixture of fear and genuine concern, had made Isabella accept the envelope instead of calling security. Now, reading through the documents for the dozenth time, Isabella felt the weight of the crown pressing down on her shoulders more heavily than ever before. The papers contained bank statements, phone records, and, most damning of all, a series of photographs that told a story the royal family had never suspected. Queen Consort Vivian, who had married King Edmund 5 years ago in what was hailed as a fairy tale romance, had been living a double life. The woman who presented herself as the perfect royal consort, devoted to charitable causes and public service, had been systematically embezzling funds from the Royal Children's Foundation. The evidence was undeniable. Millions of pounds meant for disadvantaged children had been redirected to offshore accounts under Vivian's control. But the financial crimes were only the beginning. The photographs showed Vivian in intimate situations with Marcus Hartwell, a prominent businessman who had received several lucrative government contracts since Vivian's marriage to the king. The timestamps on the photos revealed that their affair had been ongoing for over a year, overlapping with major policy decisions that had benefited Hartwell's companies. Isabella set the documents down on her mahogany desk and rubbed her temples. The implications were staggering. If this information became public, it wouldn't just destroy Vivian's reputation or end her marriage to Edmund. It would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The British people had only recently begun to trust the royal family again after years of scandals in previous decades. This revelation could reignite calls for the abolition of the monarchy entirely. She thought about her nephew, Prince William Charles, Edmund's son from his first marriage. At 35, William was being prepared to inherit the throne when Edmund eventually stepped down. He had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy, to make it more relevant and accessible to contemporary society. William had married Lady Catherine Worthington 3 years ago, and their young son, Prince Alexander, represented the future of the royal line. The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. William had always been suspicious of Vivian, though he had never voiced his concerns publicly. He had maintained a cordial but distant relationship with his stepmother, much to his father's disappointment. Edmund had hoped that Vivian would help bridge the gap between the traditional monarchy and the younger generation, but William had remained skeptical of her motives. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message from William. "Aunt Isabella, are you available for lunch today? I need to discuss something important with you." The timing felt like more than coincidence. She wondered if William had discovered something about Vivian as well, or if he simply wanted to talk about the upcoming state dinner that was consuming so much of the palace's attention. She typed back quickly, "Of course, darling. Shall we say 1 o'clock in my private dining room?" As Isabella prepared for lunch, she couldn't shake the feeling that she stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She had spent decades protecting the monarchy, but protecting it from this scandal would mean protecting a woman who had betrayed everything the crown was supposed to represent. Yet exposing Vivian would inevitably hurt Edmund and potentially destroy William's future as well. The Princess Royal's apartments occupied an entire floor of the palace's north wing, tastefully decorated with antiques and family portraits spanning 4 centuries. Isabella changed from her morning dress into a simple but elegant navy suit, checking her appearance in the mirror. She looked tired, she realized. The stress of the past 3 days had aged her more than the previous 3 years combined. A soft knock at her door announced the arrival of her lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Elizabeth Hayes, a woman who had served the royal family for over 20 years. Elizabeth's discretion was absolute, and Isabella had confided in her about many sensitive matters over the years. But this secret felt too dangerous to share with anyone, at least until she decided what to do with the information. "Your Highness," Elizabeth said, entering with a silver tea service. "Prince William has arrived. He's waiting in your dining room." "Thank you, Elizabeth. Please make sure we're not disturbed for the next hour." Isabella made her way through the familiar corridors of the palace, past portraits of ancestors who had faced their own crises and scandals. She wondered what they would advise her to do. Would they prioritize the institution above all else, or would they demand justice regardless of the consequences? William was standing by the window when she entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. He turned as she approached, and Isabella was struck by how much he resembled his late mother, the beloved Princess Margaret, who had died in a car accident when William was just 15. Margaret had been Isabella's closest friend as well as her sister-in-law, and her death had devastated the entire family. "Aunt Isabella," William said, embracing her warmly. "Thank you for making time for me. I know how busy you've been with the preparations for next week's state visit." They settled at the small round table that Isabella preferred for intimate conversations. The formal dining room could seat 24 people, but this cozy space felt more appropriate for family discussions. A simple lunch of soup and sandwiches had been prepared, though Isabella doubted either of them would have much appetite. "You mentioned you needed to discuss something important," Isabella said, studying her nephew's face. William had inherited not just his mother's looks, but also her ability to mask her emotions when necessary. However, Isabella could see tension around his eyes that suggested he was deeply troubled. William set down his soup spoon and leaned back in his chair. "I've been doing some research into the Royal Children's Foundation finances. There are some irregularities that concern me." Isabella's heart stopped. The coincidence was too remarkable to be chance. "What kind of irregularities?" "Large transfers to accounts I can't trace. Expenses that don't align with our charitable activities. And the timing corresponds exactly with Vivian's increased involvement in the Foundation's operations." William's voice was carefully controlled, but Isabella could hear the anger beneath his diplomatic tone. She made a decision in that moment that would change everything. Reaching into her handbag, Isabella withdrew the manila envelope and placed it on the table between them. "I think you need to see this." William's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as Isabella began laying out the documents. She watched his face carefully as he processed each piece of evidence. The bank statements showing the diverted funds, the photographs of Vivian with Marcus Hartwell, the timeline that connected their affair to government contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds. The silence stretched between them as William examined each document with the thoroughness he had learned from years of preparation for kingship. Isabella could see his hands trembling slightly as he held the photographs, and she noticed how his jaw tightened when he read through the financial records. Finally, William looked up at her with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of minutes. "Where did you get this?" Isabella told him about Sarah Mitchell's visit, about the envelope that had been haunting her for 3 days. She explained her own investigation into the claims and her verification of the document authenticity. Through it all, William listened in silence, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly absorbing the magnitude of what they were discussing. "This changes everything," William said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The Foundation scandal alone would be devastating, but combined with the affair and the government contracts, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I know," Isabella said simply. "The question is, what do we do about it?" William stood and walked back to the window, staring out at the grounds where tourists gathered daily to catch a glimpse of the royal family. "We have to tell Father. Whatever the consequences, He deserves to know what his wife has been doing. And after that? Isabella asked. Once Edmund knows, there's no controlling what happens next. The marriage will end, certainly. But the public will find out eventually. These kinds of secrets never stay buried forever. Then, we get ahead of it, William said, turning back to face her. We control the narrative instead of letting it control us. We show that the monarchy takes corruption seriously, that we hold ourselves to the highest standards. Isabella admired her nephew's idealism, but she had been in royal service long enough to understand the complexities they faced. It's not that simple, William. This scandal won't just hurt Vivian. It will hurt your father, your son, the entire institution. Are you prepared for what that means for your own future? William was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that reminded Isabella of his grandfather, the late King George. If my future as king depends on covering up crimes and corruption, then maybe it's not a future worth having. The conversation continued for another hour as they discussed possible scenarios and their potential consequences. Isabella found herself impressed by William's maturity and his commitment to doing what was right rather than what was easy. But she also worried about his naivety regarding the political realities they faced. As they prepared to part ways, William gathered up the documents and envelope. I'll speak with Father tonight. He needs to know before we make any other decisions. William, Isabella called as he reached the door. Whatever happens, remember that your mother would be proud of the man you've become. She always said that true nobility comes from standing up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost. William smiled sadly. I miss her wisdom. She always knew how to navigate these impossible situations. After William left, Isabella remained in her dining room, staring at the empty envelope that had contained such devastating information. She thought about the choice she had just made to share the secret with William. There was no going back now. The wheels were in motion for a confrontation that would either strengthen the monarchy by proving its integrity or destroy it by exposing its vulnerabilities. She picked up her phone and sent a message to her private secretary, canceling her evening appointments. Tonight, she would wait by her phone for news of William's conversation with his father. By tomorrow morning, the royal family would be facing the biggest crisis in a generation. Isabella just hoped they would all survive it with their honor intact. The afternoon sun was setting over the palace grounds as Isabella finally made her way back to her private apartments. In a few hours, the family she had spent her life protecting would learn that one of their own had betrayed everything they stood for. The question that haunted her was whether the truth would set them free or destroy them completely. The grandfather clock in King Edmund's private study chimed 9 times as Prince William knocked on the heavy oak door. The sound echoed through the corridor like a funeral bell, and William couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to attend the death of his family as he knew it. The manila envelope felt impossibly heavy in his hands, weighted with the power to destroy lives and reshape the future of the monarchy. Come in, came Edmund's familiar voice from within. William entered to find his father seated behind the massive desk that had served British monarchs for over 2 centuries. At 62, King Edmund still cut an imposing figure, though the stresses of ruling had added gray to his dark hair and lines around his eyes. He was reviewing documents related to the upcoming state visit, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he made notes in the margins of briefing papers. William, Edmund said, looking up with a smile that immediately faded when he saw his son's expression. You look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? William had rehearsed this conversation in his mind dozens of times during the past few hours, but now that the moment had arrived, all his planned words seemed inadequate. How do you tell a man that his wife has betrayed him in the most fundamental ways possible? How do you destroy someone's world with documents and photographs? Father, I need you to put down whatever you're working on. What I have to tell you will change everything. The gravity in William's voice cut through the comfortable atmosphere of the study. Edmund removed his glasses and set aside his papers, giving his full attention to his son. The two men had grown closer since William's mother's death, united in their shared grief and their commitment to the crown's future. Sit down, Edmund said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs positioned in front of his desk. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. William remained standing. He felt that what he was about to do required him to be on his feet, to take responsibility for the destruction he was about to unleash. 3 days ago, Aunt Isabella received some documents from a former palace employee. We verified their authenticity. He placed the envelope on Edmund's desk with hands that he willed to remain steady. Edmund stared at it for a moment. as if sensing that opening it would cross a line from which there would be no return. What kind of documents? Edmund asked quietly. Evidence that Vivian has been embezzling money from the Royal Children's Foundation. Millions of pounds that were supposed to help disadvantaged children have been diverted to offshore accounts under her control. William's voice was steady, but Edmund could see the pain in his son's eyes. Edmund's face went pale. That's a very serious accusation, William. Are you absolutely certain about this? There's more. William opened the envelope and began laying out the bank statements, arranging them chronologically so his father could see the pattern of theft. The financial crimes go back almost 2 years. But that's not the worst of it. Edmund stood slowly, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. What else? William hesitated for just a moment, then placed the photographs on top of the financial documents. The images were clear and undeniable. Vivian in intimate embraces with Marcus Hartwell, entering hotel rooms together, sharing kisses that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The silence that followed was deafening. Edmund stared at the photographs with an expression that shifted from disbelief to recognition to devastation. William watched his father's face crumble as the reality of his wife's betrayal sank in. How long? Edmund whispered. Based on the evidence, at least a year, possibly longer. William moved around the desk to stand beside his father. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry that you had to learn about this. Edmund picked up one of the photographs with shaking hands. It showed Vivian and Hartwell on a yacht, clearly comfortable and familiar with each other. The timestamp indicated it was taken just 3 weeks ago, while Edmund had been on an official visit to Scotland and Vivian had claimed to be visiting her sister in France. I trusted her, Edmund said, his voice breaking. When Margaret died, I thought I would never love anyone again. Vivian made me believe in the possibility of happiness again. William placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Throughout his childhood, Edmund had been a pillar of strength, the steady presence who helped him navigate the complexities of royal life after his mother's death. Seeing his father so broken was almost more painful than learning about Vivian's crimes. Edmund sank back into his chair, still clutching the photograph. The foundation money. Those children we were supposed to help. We can fix that, William said quickly. We can replace the stolen funds and implement new oversight procedures. The charitable work can continue. But this, Edmund held up the photograph. This destroys everything. My marriage, my judgment, my credibility as king. How can the people trust me to lead the country when I couldn't even see what was happening in my own home? William knelt beside his father's chair, something he hadn't done since he was a child seeking comfort after a nightmare. You're not responsible for her choices. You loved her in good faith. She's the one who chose to betray that love. Edmund was quiet for several minutes, studying the evidence spread across his desk. When he spoke again, his voice had regained some of its strength. What does Isabella recommend we do? We didn't get that far in our discussion. I wanted to talk to you first before making any plans. William returned to his chair. But we have to assume this information will become public eventually. We need to decide how to handle it. The police will need to be informed about the embezzlement, Edmund said, his training as a constitutional monarch overriding his personal anguish. Financial crimes of this magnitude require investigation. And Hartwell's government contracts? If there's evidence of corruption in the awarding of those contracts, that will need to be investigated as well. Edmund rubbed his temples. This could bring down the government along with the marriage. William watched his father transform before his eyes from a heartbroken husband back into a king who understood his responsibilities. It was a painful but necessary evolution. We should call Isabella, Edmund said. We need to discuss the timing of any announcements. And we'll need to inform the Prime Minister before the story breaks. As Edmund reached for his phone, there was a soft knock at the study door. Both men froze, acutely aware that they were surrounded by evidence that could destroy the monarchy if it fell into the wrong hands. Come in, Edmund called, hastily turning over the photographs. The door opened to reveal Vivian herself, elegant, as always, in a cream-colored evening dress. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless despite the late hour. She looked like the perfect queen consort, and William felt sick knowing it was all a lie. I'm sorry to interrupt, Vivian said with her characteristic warm smile. I just wanted to say goodnight before you both got too wrapped up in work to remember. She moved toward Edmund's desk, and William saw his father's hand instinctively move to cover the documents. The gesture wasn't lost on Vivian, whose eyes sharpened as she took in the tension in the room. Is everything all right? She asked, her tone still light, but with an underlying current of concern. "Everything's fine," Edmund said, his voice strained. "William and I were just discussing some foundation business." Vivian's gaze fell on the manila envelope, and William saw something flicker across her face, recognition, perhaps, or fear. For just a moment, her perfect composure slipped, revealing something calculating and cold underneath. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "Don't work too late, darling." She leaned down to kiss Edmund's cheek, and William noticed how his father didn't return the gesture. After Vivian left, closing the door behind her, Edmund slumped in his chair again. "Did you see that?" She knew something was wrong. She's been living with these secrets for so long that she's developed instincts about when she might be caught. "What do you want to do?" William asked. Edmund gathered up the documents and photographs, placing them back in the envelope. "Tomorrow morning, I'll speak with the Prime Minister and the head of the Metropolitan Police. By tomorrow night, this will be out of our hands. And Vivian? I'll confront her tonight. She deserves the chance to explain herself, even though I can't imagine what explanation could possibly justify this." Edmund stood up slowly, looking every one of his 62 years. "Will you stay in the palace tonight? I may need your support." "Of course." As William prepared to leave, Edmund called his name one more time. "Your mother always said that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply people try to bury it. I should have listened to her wisdom instead of letting my heart override my judgment." William wanted to comfort his father, but there were no words that could ease the pain of such a complete betrayal. Instead, he simply nodded and made his way to the door. "William," Edmund said one final time, "thank you for bringing this to me directly. It couldn't have been easy, but it was the right thing to do." As William walked through the darkened corridors of the palace, he passed the portraits of his ancestors and wondered what they would think of the crisis that now engulfed their family. The palace felt different somehow, as if the very walls knew that everything was about to change. He thought about Catherine and young Alexander, sleeping peacefully in their own apartments, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. Tomorrow, the scandal would begin to unfold, and their private family crisis would become a public spectacle that would be dissected by media around the world. But tonight, in the quiet hours before dawn, William found himself thinking about his mother. Princess Margaret had always taught him that true character was revealed not in times of triumph, but in moments of crisis. She would have been proud of his decision to reveal the truth, even though it would cause tremendous pain to people he loved. The monarchy would survive this scandal, William believed, because it would prove that they valued honesty and justice above personal comfort. But the family he had known all his life would never be the same. In bringing the truth to light, he had chosen duty over sentiment, and now they would all have to live with the consequences of that choice. As he reached his own apartments, William could hear voices coming from the direction of his father's private quarters. The confrontation between Edmund and Vivian had begun. By morning, the palace would be a very different place, and the future of the British monarchy would hang in the balance. The confrontation between King Edmund and Queen Consort Vivian began at 11:47 that night, in the privacy of the royal couple's shared sitting room. Edmund had spent the previous hour walking through the palace gardens, trying to gather the courage and clarity he would need for what might be the most difficult conversation of his life. The evidence was undeniable, but some part of him still hoped for an explanation that would make sense of the betrayal. Vivian was in their bedroom when he returned, seated at her vanity table removing the jewelry she had worn to that evening's charity gala. In the soft light of the bedside lamps, she looked exactly like the woman he had fallen in love with 4 years ago, elegant, sophisticated, and apparently devoted to their shared royal duties. The irony of her appearance at a charity event, given what he now knew about her theft from the Children's Foundation, made his stomach turn. "Vivian," he said from the doorway, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." She turned from her mirror, and Edmund saw her face change subtly as she registered his tone. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind? In the sitting room, please. This is important." They settled into the chairs where they had shared countless evening conversations over the years, discussing everything from state business to personal dreams. The room was decorated in soft blues and golds, with photographs of their wedding and various royal events displayed on antique tables. Looking at those images now, Edmund wondered how many of them captured moments when Vivian was already living her double life. Edmund placed the manila envelope on the coffee table between them, watching as Vivian's eyes fixed on it with unmistakable recognition. Her carefully maintained composure faltered for just a moment, revealing something like fear. Sarah Mitchell came to see Princess Isabella 3 days ago, Edmund said quietly. She brought this information about your activities over the past 2 years. Vivian's face went pale, but she maintained her poise. I'm not sure what you mean. Edmund opened the envelope and spread the bank statements across the table. These documents show systematic theft from the Royal Children's Foundation. Money meant for disadvantaged children has been diverted to offshore accounts under your control. We're talking about millions of pounds, Vivian. She stared at the papers in silence for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. I can explain. I'm listening. Vivian stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. When we married, you promised me that I would have a real role in royal life. You said I wouldn't just be a figurehead, that I could make a genuine difference in charitable work. And you have, Edmund said, confused by the direction of her explanation. Your work with the Children's Foundation has been exemplary. Exemplary and meaningless, Vivian replied, turning back to face him. Do you know how frustrating it is to host elegant fundraisers where wealthy people write checks to feel good about themselves while nothing really changes? The foundation raises money, but so little of it actually reaches the children who need it. The bureaucracy, the administrative costs, the political considerations, by the time all of that is satisfied, we're helping a handful of children when we could be saving thousands. Edmund felt a chill as he began to understand her twisted logic. So you decided to steal the money instead? I decided to use it effectively. Her voice gained strength as she defended her actions. The money I redirected has done more good than anything the official foundation ever accomplished. I've funded schools in impoverished areas, provided medical care for children who would have died without intervention, created programs that actually work instead of programs that look good on paper. Without authorization, without oversight, without any legal structure to ensure the money was actually spent appropriately. Edmund's voice was rising despite his efforts to remain calm. You committed crimes, Vivian. Serious crimes. I broke unjust rules to help children who had no other advocates, she shot back. History is full of people who broke laws to do what was morally right. Edmund reached for the photographs, his hands trembling with anger. And I suppose your affair with Marcus Hartwell was also morally justified somehow. The photographs seemed to drain the fight out of Vivian. She sank back into her chair, no longer able to maintain eye contact with her husband. That's different. Different how? Edmund demanded. Different because there's no possible way to frame adultery as charitable work. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus understood my frustration with the limitations of royal charity work. He helped me find ways to make a real difference. He helped you steal money and secure government contracts through corruption, Edmund corrected. How many of those contracts went to his companies because of your influence? I don't know what you're talking about. Edmund spread out more documents from the envelope, showing the timeline that connected Vivian's affair with Marcus to the awarding of several lucrative government contracts to his companies. The evidence is right here, Vivian. The pattern is undeniable. She studied the documents with the same expression Edmund had seen on the faces of criminals in courtrooms. There was guilt, certainly, but also a kind of defiant calculation, as if she was weighing her options for damage control rather than feeling genuine remorse. I loved you, Edmund said, and the past tense hung heavy in the air between them. When Margaret died, I thought my capacity for happiness had died with her. You brought light back into my life. You made me believe that the monarchy could be a force for genuine good in the world. I do believe that, Vivian insisted. Everything I did was to make the monarchy more effective, more relevant to people who actually need help. You used the monarchy as cover for criminal activity, Edmund replied. You betrayed every principle we claimed to represent. Honor, duty, service. You turned all of it into a lie. Vivian stood again, pacing to the fireplace where their wedding photograph sat on the mantel. What happens now? Now we face the consequences of your choices. Edmund gathered up the documents. Tomorrow morning, I'll be speaking with the Prime Minister and the police. The embezzlement will be investigated, and any corruption related to government contracts will be exposed. And us. Edmund looked at his wife, trying to reconcile the woman he had loved with the calculating criminal who had been living under his roof. There is no us anymore. Whatever we had was built on lies. Edmund, please. We can work through this privately. The money can be returned, the affair can end. No one else has to know. But I know, Edmund said, his voice breaking. I know that while I was grieving my first wife and trying to be a good father to William, You were stealing from children and betraying our marriage vows. I know that when I introduced you to world leaders as my beloved wife, you were planning your next theft or your next rendezvous with your lover. Vivian moved toward him, reaching out as if to touch his face, but Edmund stepped back. Don't. Please don't make this any more painful than it already is. I never meant for you to get hurt, she said, and, for the first time that evening, her voice carried genuine emotion. But, you knew I would be hurt, Edmund replied. You knew that what you were doing would destroy me if I found out. You just gambled that I never would. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the practical details of their immediate future. Vivian would remain in the palace until the next evening, giving her time to pack her personal belongings and prepare for the media storm that would follow her departure. Edmund would file for divorce immediately, and Vivian would lose her royal titles and her role in any official capacity. As they prepared to separate for what would likely be the last time as husband and wife, Vivian made one final attempt to justify her actions. The money I took will do more good in the hands of people who actually understand poverty than it ever would have done through official channels. Whatever you think of my methods, the results speak for themselves. Edmund shook his head sadly. The results include the complete destruction of our marriage, damage to the monarchy's reputation, and the end of your own life as you've known it for the past 5 years. Whatever good you think you accomplished with stolen money will be overshadowed by the harm you've done to every institution and relationship you've touched. After Vivian left for her own bedroom, Edmund remained in their sitting room, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. He thought about calling William or Isabella, but he needed time alone to process the full magnitude of what had just occurred. The woman he had shared his bed with for 5 years had been systematically stealing from children while carrying on an affair that had corrupted government contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds. She had looked him in the eye every day while living these lies, attending state functions as his queen while planning her next crime. But, perhaps most painfully, she seemed genuinely surprised that he was hurt by her actions. In her mind, she had been doing noble work that justified any means necessary. She had no understanding of the sacred trust she had violated or the personal devastation she had caused. As Edmund finally made his way to his own bedroom, he realized that tomorrow would bring not just the exposure of Vivian's crimes, but the beginning of his own redemption. The monarchy would survive this scandal because they had chosen truth over comfort, justice over convenience. But, tonight, alone in the bed he had shared with a woman who had never really existed, King Edmund wept for the love he had lost, and the future he would have to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. In the distance, he could hear Vivian moving around in her room, probably packing the belongings she would take when she left royal life forever. By this time tomorrow, she would be a private citizen facing criminal charges, and he would be a king whose judgment had been catastrophically flawed, but whose integrity remained intact. The hardest part was over. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but the truth was finally free. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street, as Prime Minister Robert Ashworth reviewed the documents that King Edmund had delivered an hour earlier. Ashworth, a seasoned politician who had survived numerous scandals during his 8 years in office, had seen shocking revelations before. But nothing in his career had prepared him for evidence that the Queen Consort had been systematically embezzling from charity while conducting an affair that had corrupted government contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Sitting across from the Prime Minister, Edmund looked like he had aged a decade overnight. The king's usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of a man who had watched his world crumble in the span of 12 hours. Between them on the polished mahogany table lay the manila envelope that had become the center of a crisis threatening both the monarchy and the government. Your Majesty, Ashworth said carefully, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. The financial crimes alone would be devastating enough, but if there's evidence of corruption in government contracting, Marcus Hartwell's companies have received 4 major government contracts since my marriage to Vivian, Edmund replied, his voice hoarse from the previous night's confrontation. Road construction, telecommunications infrastructure, medical supplies for the National Health Service, and cybersecurity consulting. The total value exceeds £400 million. Ashworth felt his stomach drop. Were you aware of any connection between the Queen Consort and Mr. Hartwell when those contracts were awarded? I had no knowledge of their relationship whatsoever. Vivian occasionally mentioned meeting various business leaders at charitable events, but I never suspected anything improper. Edmund paused, rubbing his temples. Looking back, I realized there were signs I should have noticed. She was often unavailable when I tried to reach her, claiming to be at meetings that couldn't be verified. She became secretive about her schedule and defensive when I asked questions about her activities. The Prime Minister made notes as Edmund spoke, already calculating the political implications. The opposition would demand a full investigation into every government contract awarded during Vivian's time as Queen Consort. Questions would be raised about the vetting procedures for royal spouses and the oversight of charitable organizations connected to the monarchy. Has the Queen Consort been informed that you're sharing this information with me? Ashworth asked. We spoke last night. She's aware that legal action is inevitable. Edmund's voice grew even quieter. She attempted to justify her actions as being more effective than traditional charitable channels. She seemed genuinely surprised that I viewed her behavior as criminal rather than innovative. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Ashworth's private secretary entered with a concerned expression. Prime Minister, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation developing. Several news organizations have received anonymous tips about financial irregularities in the Royal Children's Foundation. They're asking for comment. Edmund and Ashworth exchanged alarmed glances. How much do they know? The Prime Minister asked. The details are vague so far, but they're specifically asking about overseas transfers and questioning the Foundation's accounting practices. The BBC is planning to run a story this evening unless we provide a response. After the secretary left, Edmund slumped in his chair. It's starting. Once the media begins investigating, every detail will be exposed. Perhaps that's for the best, Ashworth replied. Controlled disclosure might be better than allowing the story to develop through speculation and leaks. They spent the next 2 hours crafting a strategy for managing the crisis. The Metropolitan Police would be briefed immediately and would launch a formal investigation into both the embezzlement and the potential contract corruption. The cabinet would be convened for an emergency meeting that afternoon. Most importantly, they would prepare a joint statement acknowledging the serious allegations and emphasizing their commitment to a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, across London at Buckingham Palace, Princess Isabella was dealing with her own crisis management. The palace's communications director had been alerting her throughout the morning about media inquiries, and it was clear that the story was building momentum faster than anyone had anticipated. William found his aunt in her office, surrounded by drafts of press statements and legal documents. How bad is it? He asked. The story is going to break tonight regardless of what we do, Isabella replied. The question is whether we can control the narrative or whether we're simply going to be reacting to whatever version the media publishes. She showed William the latest inquiries from journalists. Beyond the financial questions, reporters were now asking about Vivian's relationship with Marcus Hartwell and his company's government contracts. Someone with access to detailed information was feeding the story to multiple news outlets simultaneously. Do we know who's leaking information? William asked. It could be anyone with access to financial records from the Foundation, the government contracting office, or even someone from Hartwell's company who knew about the affair, Isabella said. Once this many people know about a scandal, containment becomes impossible. William thought about his conversation with his father the night before and the pain he had seen in Edmund's eyes. How is he holding up? He's putting on a brave face for the Prime Minister and the palace staff, but this is destroying him, Isabella replied honestly. He truly loved Vivian, and discovering that their entire marriage was built on lies has shattered something fundamental in him. As they discussed the various legal and public relations challenges ahead, William's phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. The children are asking why their grandfather looks so sad. What should I tell them? The reminder of his family's innocence in this scandal hit William hard. His 3-year-old son Alexander had no understanding of the adult complexities that were about to reshape his world. Catherine, who had always been supportive of the monarchy despite her initial reservations about royal life, would now face intense media scrutiny as the scandal unfolded. Isabella, William said suddenly, I need to ask you something important. When this all comes out, there will be questions about the monarchy's future. People will wonder whether an institution that couldn't detect such serious criminality in its own ranks deserves to exist. Isabella set down the documents she had been reviewing and gave William her full attention. What are you really asking me? I'm asking whether you think I should still pursue the throne after all of this. Whether the monarchy can survive another major scandal. William's voice carried a vulnerability that reminded Isabella of the frightened boy he had been after his mother's death. The monarchy has survived civil wars, world wars, abdications, and countless scandals, Isabella replied. It survives because it adapts, and because it ultimately serves something larger than the personal failings of individual members. Your grandfather understood that, your father understands it, and you understand it too. But public trust will be damaged in the short term and restored over time through our actions, Isabella interrupted. The fact that we're exposing these crimes rather than covering them up will ultimately strengthen the monarchy's credibility. We're proving that no one is above the law, not even a queen consort. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the palace's head of security, Commander James Morrison, a former Metropolitan Police officer who had served the royal family for over 15 years. His expression was grave as he entered Isabella's office. Your Royal Highness, he said, nodding to both Isabella and William. We have a developing situation. Queen Consort Vivian has not been seen since early this morning. Her personal protection officer reports that she left the palace at approximately 8 a.m., claiming she had a medical appointment. She has not returned, and she's not responding to attempts to contact her. William felt his heart skip. Has she fled? We're investigating all possibilities, Commander Morrison replied diplomatically. Her credit cards show activity at Heathrow Airport, and passenger manifests indicate she boarded a flight to Geneva at 11:30 this morning using her diplomatic passport. Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. So she's run, just when we thought this couldn't get any worse. The implications were staggering. Vivian's flight would be interpreted by the media and the public as an admission of guilt. It would make the royal family look incompetent at best and complicit at worst. Most importantly, it would complicate any legal proceedings and make recovery of the stolen funds much more difficult. Has His Majesty been informed? William asked. I briefed him 20 minutes ago, Morrison replied. He's requested that no efforts be made to encourage her return. His exact words were that she's made her choice and must live with the consequences. As the security chief left to coordinate with various law enforcement agencies, William and Isabella were left to contemplate this latest development. Vivian's flight transformed their carefully planned crisis management strategy into damage control for a scandal that was spiraling completely out of their control. We need to get ahead of this, Isabella said, reaching for her phone. If the media learns about her disappearance before we acknowledge it, they'll assume we're hiding even more serious crimes. Within minutes, Isabella was coordinating with the Prime Minister's office, the Metropolitan Police, and Interpol. The Queen Consort's flight would be treated as an international incident requiring cooperation between multiple law enforcement agencies. Switzerland's banking secrecy laws would complicate efforts to freeze her assets, and her diplomatic status would create additional legal hurdles. As William prepared to return to his own family, he realized that the crisis was evolving beyond anything they had imagined possible. What had started as the discovery of financial irregularities had become an international manhunt for a fleeing royal who had abandoned her duties and her marriage in the face of criminal accusations. The monarchy would indeed survive this scandal, as Isabella had predicted. But the institution that emerged from the crisis would be fundamentally different from the one that had existed just 24 hours earlier. The age of unquestioned deference to royal authority was ending, replaced by a new era where even Queen's Consort would be held accountable for their actions. By evening, the story would dominate headlines around the world. The fairy tale marriage between King Edmund and his elegant bride would be revealed as a carefully constructed lie that had enabled years of criminal activity. And, somewhere in Switzerland, the woman who had once been second in line to become Queen of England would be learning what it meant to live as a fugitive from justice. The hardest lessons were yet to come, but the truth was finally unstoppable. The Gothic magnificence of Westminster Abbey had witnessed the coronations of monarchs for nearly 1,000 years. But, as Prince William knelt before the Archbishop of Canterbury 6 months after the Vivian scandal broke, the ancient ceremony carried weight beyond mere tradition. The crown being placed upon his head represented not just the continuation of royal lineage, but the redemption of an institution that had been tested by fire and emerged transformed. King Edmund's abdication had shocked the world, though those close to the royal family understood it as the inevitable conclusion of a broken man's journey toward peace. The former king had spent months working with investigators to uncover the full extent of Vivian's crimes, testifying before parliamentary committees, and ultimately deciding that his judgment had been so catastrophically compromised that he could no longer serve the British people with the authority and credibility they deserved. I accept this crown not as a birthright, but as a sacred trust, William said, his voice carrying clearly through the Abbey's soaring nave. I pledge to serve with humility, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The congregation included heads of state from around the world, but William's eyes found his family in the front rows. Catherine, now queen consort, sat with 4-year-old Prince Alexander, who was trying his best to sit still during the lengthy ceremony. Princess Isabella, elevated to the role of senior advisor to the crown, watched with pride as the nephew she had helped raise finally claimed his destiny. In the months following Vivian's flight to Switzerland, the full scope of her criminal enterprise had been revealed through meticulous investigation. The embezzled funds totaled nearly £12 million, stolen systematically over a 3-year period through sophisticated accounting manipulations. The corruption in government contracting proved even more extensive, with Marcus Hartwell's companies receiving favorable treatment worth hundreds of millions of pounds in exchange for what prosecutors termed intimate access to royal influence. Vivian herself remained in Geneva, protected by Switzerland's complex extradition laws, and apparently living comfortably on money hidden in numbered bank accounts. Her rare public statements, delivered through expensive lawyers, continued to frame her crimes as misguided charitable work and her affair as a regrettable personal failing rather than part of a systematic corruption scheme. The investigation had also revealed the tragic effectiveness of her manipulation. Several of the projects she had funded with stolen money were indeed helping disadvantaged children, creating a complex moral landscape that made simple condemnation difficult. Her defenders argued that she had accomplished more real charitable work in 3 years than the official foundation had managed in decades, conveniently ignoring the criminal methods used to achieve those results. But, for William, now King William V, the moral complexity of Vivian's case had crystallized into a simple principle that would define his reign. Good intentions could never justify corrupt methods, and the monarchy's credibility depended on absolute adherence to the law regardless of personal cost. The coronation ceremony concluded with the traditional presentation of the new monarch to his people, but William had insisted on modern additions that reflected his commitment to transparency. Unlike previous coronations, this ceremony was followed by an unprecedented question-and-answer session with representatives from major news organizations, broadcast live around the world. "Your Majesty," asked Rebecca Chun from the BBC, "how will your reign differ from your father's, particularly given the lessons learned from the recent scandal?" William, still wearing the heavy crown of St. Edward, chose his words carefully. "My father was a good king who was betrayed by someone he trusted completely. I intend to implement new systems of oversight and accountability that will prevent such betrayals from occurring again, while maintaining the monarchy's essential role in British society." Sarah Thompson from The Guardian followed up. "What specific changes will you make to prevent similar scandals?" "All royal charitable work will now be subject to independent auditing," William replied. "Financial records will be published annually, and any royal spouse will undergo the same security vetting required for senior government positions. We're also establishing an independent ethics committee with the power to investigate any concerns about royal conduct." The questions continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from the monarchy's role in modern democracy to William's plans for healing the divisions caused by his stepmother's crimes. Throughout the session, he demonstrated the transparency and accountability that would characterize his approach to kingship. Later that evening, the traditional coronation banquet at Buckingham Palace brought together world leaders, but the conversations inevitably turned to the remarkable transformation of the British monarchy. President Martinez of Spain, who had known William since childhood, remarked on the profound change in his demeanor. "You carry yourself differently than you did even a year ago," she observed during a private moment in the palace's blue drawing room. "The weight of what you've been through shows, but so does your strength." William nodded thoughtfully. Crisis has a way of clarifying what truly matters. For too long, the monarchy operated on the assumption that our intentions were sufficient justification for our actions. We've learned that institutions, like individuals, must be held accountable for their conduct. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Princess Isabella, who had been coordinating with security officials about ongoing threats related to Vivian's criminal associates. Several of Marcus Hartwell's business partners had been arrested in connection with the contracting corruption, and authorities remained concerned about potential retaliation against the royal family. "Any word from Swiss authorities about extradition proceedings?" William asked quietly. "Their courts are still reviewing the British request," Isabella replied. Her lawyers are arguing that the charges are politically motivated and that she wouldn't receive a fair trial in Britain given the media coverage. William felt a familiar surge of anger when he thought about Vivian living freely in Geneva while the charity children she had robbed continued to suffer from underfunded programs. But he had learned to channel that anger into determination to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. The Swiss process will take as long as it takes, he said finally. Our focus must be on rebuilding trust with the British people and proving that the monarchy deserves their continued support. As the evening progressed, William found himself in conversation with Prime Minister Ashworth about the broader implications of the scandal for British governance. The opposition had used Vivian's crimes to argue for wholesale reform of the constitutional monarchy, and several prominent politicians had called for a referendum on abolishing the royal family entirely. The polling suggests that support for the monarchy has actually increased since you became king, Ashworth reported. The public seems to appreciate your transparency and your father's willingness to abdicate when his judgment was compromised. It's being seen as evidence that the institution can hold itself accountable. William was gratified by the polling results, but he remained focused on the long-term challenge of earning continued public trust. We can't govern based on polling data. We have to prove through our actions that the monarchy adds value to British society. Near midnight, as the last guests departed, William finally had a chance to speak privately with his father. Edmund had attended the coronation and banquet, but had remained largely in the background, clearly uncomfortable with the attention despite his continued popularity with many members of the public who admired his sacrifice. They met in the same study where Edmund had first learned about Vivian's crimes 6 months earlier. The room had been redecorated since then, with new furniture and artwork that held no memories of the confrontation that had changed everything. "How does it feel?" Edmund asked, gesturing toward the crown that William had finally removed and placed on a nearby table. "Heavy," William replied honestly. "Not just physically, but emotionally. Every decision I make will be scrutinized through the lens of what happened with Vivian. People will always wonder whether I'm capable of better judgment than you were." Edmund winced slightly at the implied criticism, but he had long since accepted responsibility for his role in the scandal. "I chose to marry someone without truly knowing who she was. I was so lonely after your mother's death that I ignored warning signs that should have been obvious." "You chose to trust someone who seemed worthy of trust," William corrected gently. "The fault lies with her deception, not your openness to love." They talked for another hour about the challenges ahead and the changes that would need to continue throughout William's reign. Edmund would be retiring to a private estate in Scotland, far from the media scrutiny that continued to follow the royal family. He planned to write his memoirs, with all proceeds going to the Royal Children's Foundation to help replace the funds that Vivian had stolen. As dawn broke over London, William made his way to his private apartments where Catherine and Alexander were sleeping. The palace felt different now that it was truly his responsibility. Every corridor, every room, every tradition would now be shaped by his vision for a more transparent and accountable monarchy. He thought about Vivian, probably waking up in her Swiss exile to read news coverage of his coronation. Did she feel any regret for the destruction she had caused, or did she still believe her crimes were justified by their charitable outcomes? He suspected he would never know the answer, and he was beginning to accept that her motivations mattered less than the lessons her betrayal had taught. The monarchy would endure because it had proven capable of change. The institution that had survived the abdication crisis of 1936, the scandals of the 1990s, and countless other challenges would survive this one too. But it would emerge stronger, more honest, and more worthy of the British people's trust. As King William V prepared for his first full day of reign, he carried with him the hard-earned wisdom that true leadership required not just good intentions, but the courage to hold oneself and one's institutions accountable to the highest standards. The crown on his head represented not just the continuation of tradition, but the promise of transformation. The story that had begun with a manila envelope full of devastating secrets had become a testament to the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. And, in the end, that truth had not destroyed the monarchy but had revealed its capacity for redemption.